Welcome to Therapy in the Great Outdoors, the podcast where we explore the business and practice of nature-based pediatric therapy of all kinds. If you're an outdoor-loving pediatric practitioner in the fields of occupational, physical, or speech therapy, social work, or mental health, this podcast will help you start and grow a successful nature-based practice or program. I am the ever honest, always 100% real, you'll hear it all on this podcast, Dr. Laura Park Figueroa. I'm a pediatric OT with over 20 years of experience, and I run a thriving nature-based practice with profitable locations in 2 different states and multi-six figures in revenue. I also host the free online community at therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com to help you pursue your nature-based therapy dreams too. Are you ready to take action on those dreams? Let's jump in. Welcome, everyone, back to Therapy in the Great Outdoors. Today, I have a special guest because I've known Marianna because I taught in her OT program way back when she graduated, like 4 years ago now. Yeah. So it's really exciting that you're here for a live coaching call to help you with your business. So introduce yourself to everyone and just tell them a little bit about where you're at in your nature-based practice.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I'm super happy to be here. My name is Marianna Ayers Sordille. I am in the process of starting my own outdoor therapy clinic on my own property. So it's actually going to be outdoors and indoors. I'll have the sensory integration clinic. Right now, I rent space at a private practice clinic. That's wonderful. And so they're super flexible there about transitioning here for however much I want to. I love it there. I love my colleagues there, and I love the collaboration. I actually get some mentoring as well. I don't think I'll ever want to leave there 100%. I fear that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I never want to be by myself. But so I think that piece will always be there. But I certainly want to transition most of my caseload here.
Outdoors, yeah.
Yes.
And at your home site, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so in 6 to 12 months, what would your dream outcome be in your nature-based practice?
To have, I would say, 80% of the clients that I see here. And then within that, and this is a question I'm on here for today, but majority of those kiddos to be kids I'm seeing for intensive therapy. So at least 2 to 3 times a week. Because, I have other further plans like providing camps for spring and summertime. But yeah, 6 months to a year, I would say that's actually pretty ambitious. Maybe let's say 80% of my caseload here at my house.
Okay. Yeah. How much is that? How many kids is that? When you say 80%, how many kids are you currently seeing?
Yeah.
And are you pulling those kids from is this okay with your employer that you're taking kids to your practice? Are you meaning all new kids?
Totally.
That you would be?
Yeah. So all new kids. So I have my own practice already. I rent space. So I'm running my own business, all that, but I pay for the space that I rent there weekly. But I also do get, not weekly, per session, but I also do get referrals through that clinic as well. They're more established.
Sure.
But I have a medical contract as well. So I do get some of my own referrals, and I just recently started getting, for the little bit I've put out into the world on my website, it's nowhere close to being done. I have started to get a little bit of traction there. And that's something that I work out with the space that I rent from as well. They're flexible and it goes both ways. But my medical contract clients would certainly come here no matter what, unless they didn't want to stick with me. But the referrals I have from them would most likely stay there unless there's someone who lives super close and and I would probably pay or something to have them come here. It's just if they really wanted to stick with me. But
flexible. So you're talking about basically, I just want to be clear on what our goal is here. So you're doing the exact same thing I did when I started my nature-based practice. And I was basically able to I was renting space at a clinic for my own clients that I was responsible for booking and scheduling and all of that. And
Yeah.
I was just renting space at the clinic. And then when I decided to take my work outdoors, I basically just took those kids with me because they were my clients. So that's a
Okay.
lot different
Yeah.
than what I was thinking. You were like an employee at this clinic and they were supporting you. And so it's much easier and
Yeah.
cleaner the way you have it, is that
Yeah.
you're renting space, they're your clients, and you're going to move, right? So is your thought that you would move though? Are some of those clients coming with you? I'm trying to get a number for how
Mhm.
many kids we need to have you
Yeah.
hit this goal that you have of having 80%
So,
of your caseload be at your property, at your own property.
yeah, thank you for that. So, a couple of things. I rent space there. Right now, I have time Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And Wednesdays is just
Okay.
like a half day. And then, it has been a challenge to get clients in the morning time. So, right now,
Yeah.
I have about 15 clients, and that actually feels really good for me. I don't think
Okay.
I'm ever going to be someone who wants to have like 3 clients a week because, as we know, there's so
Right.
much other work that goes into it, but also just for me and my health and what feels comfortable, family and work balance, that seems like a really good number for me right now. And then when we throw in like intensives, that number might be a lot smaller.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So why would the people from the clinic not just follow you to your property?
So, because some of them are referred, they were referred directly through the clinic that I work at.
Okay. Okay. So
I
you're
mean,
being respectful and continuing
totally.
to see them there. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And then we're starting to talk about transition date for the days that I will stop there and onboarding them to someone else or changing their schedule. Yeah. So
Okay.
it really depends, I think, on my end, the availability of other clinicians there, whether they're able to take over, and then of course
Totally.
the
Yep.
family's availability to come here
Yeah.
and if it's like feasible because it is a little bit different in terms of geographical location.
Okay. Yeah. How far away are you from the clinic? Your location where you live?
I am 30 minutes without traffic, but typically like
Yeah.
45, 50 minutes, depending on the time of
So
day.
that's
Yeah,
Yep, that's going to impact, especially with time of day, right? That's going to impact because a lot of kids are coming after school hours during rush hour. So that will impact. You might actually have a situation where you do need to build new clientele
totally.
for your practice on your property because
Yeah,
the distance is just too much. I know Bay Area traffic and it's just that's what we didn't really say that. Like you're near where my practice is, but probably gosh, Clayton is like probably an hour from where
yeah.
my practice
If
is,
not
right?
more
Like in
from where
Oakland,
where I live, I think it's a little
maybe even
more.
more with
Yeah,
traffic. Yeah,
traffic
so
for
we're
like an hour and a half.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I know the area where you are is all I'm saying in the context of this conversation. So what is getting in the way right now? And that's what I want to spend the bulk of the time on this call on. What is getting in the way right now, or what challenges are you having with getting to that goal of having the number of clients that you want in your practice within
yeah.
the next 6 to 12 months?
First off, like the bathroom and things here, like physical things that I need here, and
Mhm.
then like safety considerations, there's things that have to be done here. Also, I do have some things lined up for getting my own clients, starting to talk with local preschools, and actually have a meeting this afternoon with the neuropsych office. I've been in communication with some pediatrician offices,
Mhm.
and so I have that stuff in mind. I'm like, okay, we can start getting more referrals from there. I also have um, a medical contract with Kaiser, and I'm also going to start seeing feeding clients with Kaiser as well. Things are picking up in terms of being able to get some kids here, but for me, I'm really trying to nail down what is like really my niche. Definitely, I know that having the outdoor space is like a huge niche, right? But and then having and the sensory clinic, I'm just like I know some of the clients that I see, I don't know how they would do right away outdoors. Some of them really need that hands on, super close support.
Yeah.
I
No,
really want
you're
to
great.
market it like I really love being able to work with families twice or more a week. I really enjoy being able to work with families in a more short term, like intensive model.
Okay.
I know that it's done, like STAR and ASI clinics do it a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And then figuring out how to, because I really think I'm preferring to just do the private pay model. And so understanding how to do either like packages, or for intensives, am I just charging per session? And then also how do the package options work in terms of setting goals? So are we setting goals per therapy package? And then, yeah, so I've thought about having a payment system, like something like a firm or something where families can use, because it's a big investment, especially for intensive financially, which ends up being like the same, right, for the longer term clients who are
Mm-hmm.
seen less frequently. But then also thinking about too, okay, if I see a child for 20 to 30 sessions in a few months, are they going to be ready to completely discharge, or am I going to hold that space open where I'm like, oh, I can still see them weekly to continue tidying up on this or that? But and then so yeah, the feeding thing, which so feeding and typical OT, I don't want to do too much. For me, feeding is, we're not billing for time in the gym, but for me, it's a necessity to support a child's feeding, is to be able to
Mm-hmm.
have that movement. And sorry, I don't know why I started talking about that, but I'm just thinking like trying to narrow down where to start in terms of like how I want to market myself.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So we have bathroom safety, reaching out to preschools, reaching out to pediatricians' offices. You have a contract with Kaiser, and you have feeding clients. You want to do short term intensives outdoors. There's questions around packages for intensive, goals for intensives, and how people are going to pay for your services.
Yes.
So I think this is a great example of how there is so much to organize when you are starting any business really, but a nature-based service, right?
Yeah.
There's no way we're going to cover this all in 30 minutes. Like, we know this, right?
Mhm.
I do think focusing in on the question of your niche and what exactly are you going to offer, and some of the
Mhm.
questions around marketing that and how people will pay for it and setting up the system around that, you have to have those in place,
Right.
because you can't market if you don't know your niche. You can't market if you don't know what you're communicating to families. Like, you have to get that dialed in
Right.
to start any business, right? So I think
And
I wrote a little note here while you were talking, like, just to myself, because I think it's an interesting thing to think about, that more and more people are starting nature-based practices, right? Like, you don't have a guarantee anymore. Like, it used to be like 10 years ago, it was like if you were a nature-based practice, that was a niche. My practice was so innovative when we started.
right.
And now it's, who cares? Everybody does that. There are so many therapists entering nature-based work now
Yeah.
that you do not have a guarantee that is going to be a niche, right? That
Right.
is going to be enough of a niche to actually make you stand out. So I love that you're thinking about this idea of intensives, because the nature piece plus the intensives, that's a niche. Like,
Yeah.
that's really a thing that really sets you apart, right? Because there might be other nature-based practices in the vicinity, like my practice, that isn't going to do intensives. Like, we don't operate that way. All of our systems are set up the way they are, and we're not going to change that to do something totally different right now.
Yeah.
And so I do like the idea of pairing those two things together, like you having the outdoor space and then also having the intensive model. At the same time, a niche also needs to be focused on a specific clientele, right? So I've heard you talk about the feeding clients. Do you want to see all feeding clients, or is how much of your caseload would you like that to be? Or is that even part of your niche? Talk to me a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's so tricky because I feel like even my kids who I'm not seeing for feeding and don't have feeding goals with, it always comes up. It's always part of the
Mm.
conversation. And I don't know, maybe I'm not marketing like feeding therapy, but I'm just like that's one of the areas we cover, you know what I mean? So it's in the package for OT, right? We can address some
Yeah.
feeding,
Yeah.
but there are a lot of extra resources and different things that come with feeding, right? It's definitely something I'm trying to figure out. And based on the feeding therapy experience that I have so far, I'm like, wow, it's different. For OT, it's a lot of behind the scenes work too, right? Like collaborating with other professionals and like building those like home programs. But it's I guess a lot of the sensory diet piece sometimes is super similar. But then when it comes to like mealtime strategies and those type of small like nuanced things, it's different.
Yeah, I think you need to really think about, because you're right. Just listening to you talk, I'm like, there's a lot that's different about feeding therapy.
Yeah,
And it's not that you could do feeding therapy outdoors. You could have feeding groups, you
totally.
could have like you could totally do that. And I think that'd be a really great niche to do. But
Yeah.
also, I always want to encourage us to think about, is our niche too small? Because you'll hear these like big entrepreneurs online, you watch people on Instagram, whatever. If you're interested in small business content, then Instagram will start to throw all the business people at you in your feed. And a lot of times I hear like entrepreneurship advice that you can't have a niche that's too small. This one lady all she does is artistic paintings of chihuahuas or something, like just some kind of random, like totally random niche.
Yeah.
But the reality is that with a practice, a therapy practice where you are providing direct services to people, it's very different than a lot of the entrepreneurship stuff that you're going to hear online, which tends to be driven honestly towards online business owners. And so your niche can be too small, especially if you're a private pay practice, you're doing intensives, you have the outdoor model. Like the more you add to that, the more you're going to narrow your base of people who would even be able to come to you for services.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we need to make a decision about this on this call, or that you need to, but I do think making sure that your niche is broad enough, like that you can communicate exactly who your services are for on your website, is really important. And I'm not sure if the feeding niche with the other things that you want, I feel like it would maybe be too small. That's just my gut feeling. I don't know. I would have to do some market research in your area, really honestly, to determine if it is. Maybe there's wait lists 100 people long at some private clinic that you know of, and you just know that there's a niche there. Maybe there is. But I want you thinking towards growth too. Like I know right now you only want 15 clients, but you've probably heard me say this on other live coaching calls too, that if we don't think about growth from the very beginning, we are forever going to be working more and more in our businesses, and we'll totally burn out, even in nature-based practice, which is so idyllic and you love being outside and all of that. But thinking about building a practice that is actually sustainable and gives you income even when you're working part-time as the owner, this is like what I want to help people do, right? And the only way to do that is to hire people down the road. I just want you to make sure that your niche is big enough for the time at which you potentially decide that you would like to hire someone and have more kids coming to your practice. So I don't think it would be my general advice when people are at where you are is to pick one thing and do that one thing really well and then branch out, right? So maybe that's that you start with feeding clients and then you branch out to kids with whatever other issues you want to work on, right? Whatever other diagnoses or like specific areas that you'd want to work on in development, like you start to add that later. Or maybe the opposite is true, where you set the feeding aside for a minute just to get started.
Right.
And then you broaden it a little more broadly, maybe to kids with sensory processing disorder or something like that, where it's like a broader kind of, maybe it's mental health challenges. I don't know what you like to work with, but giving it a broader feel so that then your marketing reaches a broader kind of number of people. And then when you add other services in the future, you have more people are more aware of your business in the community. So just some food for thought on niche. I don't think we need to drill down into it here, but just thinking about your marketing, especially as you're getting started, has to be very specifically targeted to exactly who you want to work with in order to attract the right people to your business.
And it is like I love feeding, and I think that it's so interrelated with OT. Like it's all the same in terms of like motor challenges and like, typically like sensory things going on. But I don't think I ever want to do just feeding. Like, I think that's, yeah, when you're saying that, I'm like, oh no, like I wouldn't want to do just feeding. So there's that. Yeah.
So listen to that.
Yeah.
That's your gut telling you.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times as therapists are constantly thinking, how can I serve more people? How can I help everyone? And if your gut is telling you, I don't want to do just feeding, you should not start with just feeding then. That is like a very clear indication. If your gut was like, I don't want to do just feeding, then don't start your business with just feeding, because that's a fast path to burnout. Again, like you're going to be doing something that you don't want to be doing all the time.
Got it.
I think one of the hardest things for entrepreneurs is picking one thing and sticking with it. Because therapists, we have all these interests, all these things. We could do emotional regulation. We could do feeding therapy. We could do aquatic therapy. We could do hippotherapy. We could do outdoor groups. There's all these things we could do. And yes, some very large practices are successful at having all of these programs, but they did not start there.
Right.
They did not start there.
Right.
Right. So picking what you want to do first, what you feel like you would enjoy doing for 15 clients a week is the key thing. Okay. So think on that. You don't have to decide right now. Let's talk a little bit about, I want to be mindful of time here. Let's talk a little bit about packages and goals for, you had some questions around packaging for intensives and goals for intensives. And I wrote down while you were talking, I was just jotting down notes so I could have an outline here. And one of the things that I think you absolutely need to put in your marketing is because we choose to do these intensives because they give you faster progress for your kid, right? That needs to be all over your website.
Yeah.
The reason we offer our services this way is because it gives you faster progress when you come multiple times a week than when you come once a week. That's just logical, right? Yeah. Like we know that's the case. If a child comes to therapy and has more intense intervention, they obviously would make progress more quickly.
Yeah.
When you create packages, you need to make sure that you are accounting for every minute that your brain is thinking about that child in the process.
Yeah. So I was thinking about that because, oh my gosh, so much time right now just for individual sessions.
Oh yeah.
Like I just had a 45-minute call this morning with the psychologist who's working with my clients. And I'm like,
yeah.
Do I bill for that? I should. But so I was thinking for the packages, I feel like it would give me more room for that too. So because the home programs and like consults, usually we just, home programs, I don't usually charge extra for, but for the parents, or I'm like, we really need to talk for an extended amount of time. Can we book 30 minutes or whatever? Yeah. That's usually added on. But I feel like I wanted to hear your thoughts on having a package for 20 sessions, and then because it's so hard to tell from the beginning how much time you're going to need to spend with the family. Like sometimes families are with it. They're like, oh, I get it. I understand. Yeah. And we do this. And then sometimes I totally read families wrong where they're like super invested in doing all these things, but it's just harder for things to click. And so I end up spending so much more time. But I'm like, okay, if we do 20 sessions, then we can maybe in 3 weeks, we'll just have 2 sessions together with the client. And then one of those will be with the family. So I can save this many sessions, but we can use them for consult as needed. I don't know.
Yeah. So I like the way you're thinking of this, because you're thinking towards paying yourself for all the time that you're spending that is unpaid time we don't set up the expectation in advance that it's going to be paid. None of us would ever hire a lawyer and expect that they were just going to talk to us for 45 minutes for free on the phone and we weren't going to be paying for it. Yeah. Right. So some of that is like industry expectations, right? But as therapists, there's no reason why we should expect parents to assume that they were going to get us on the phone for 45 minutes or get us to talk to another professional about their child for 45 minutes without being paid for that time. So you're thinking the right direction. I think what saves a lot of the uncomfortableness on our part of charging for those things is when we have it set up in advance. It's part of the package. You get this is what you pay for. And then there's a lot of clarity. So it works with kids too, right? Like kids need to know what to expect in a session. That's why we do our little visual schedule or whatever with them, or we just tell them what's coming. Same with parents. Give them a visual and help them understand what your services include and why it's included. So that will help you stand out as well, because you are going to be able to put on your website, all packages at Whole Child Pediatrics include XYZ, and list out the things that are included in that package. So if you're going to do, like you said, a session, I don't know if I would do 20 to start.
Mhm.
I feel like that's a lot of visits to start. That's, if you're doing intensive, it's not that many. It's like
10 weeks if you do
what would it
twice.
be? You're doing twice or three times a week?
That's something I think I think it, yeah. I am right now, I'm familiar with doing twice a week.
Okay.
And that feels good.
Okay.
But I think for some of like the younger kids who are pretty, who have more severe challenges, that's when I think maybe 3 would be better. And maybe that's something I've been reaching out to Star. I would love to talk to somebody. I know their model is a little different because people are actually like there when they get their intensive, in terms of like they're usually visiting from out of town. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah.
I don't know. I just don't know. I think you need to think about, I don't care what Star does, because you're right. It's a totally different model than what, like, people aren't traveling from out of town and staying in a hotel while you see their kid, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about, I think what they do is valuable and stuff. I'm not trying to diminish it. But I think for us as nature-based therapists, we have to think about, what does our current clientele and our community need? And one thing that came to mind, and as you were talking about 3 times a week, I was thinking like, okay, what do I know about people in the Bay Area? What do we know about parents in the Bay Area?
Yeah. They're really busy. They're stressed out.
They're really busy.
Yeah.
Stressed out.
And part of this, and I totally forgot to mention, part of what I want my niche to be is to be towards the younger kids. So 2 to 6. And that's because I really enjoy working with that population, but also for my goals.
That's a niche, Marianna. That's a niche.
Okay. But also, I don't want to be working until 6 p.m. Like, I want to see my kids in the morning at their optimal time, my optimal functional time. Honestly, that's really big for me. I feel like when I start my day late and end my day late, I'm just like a mess. Because I'm up early. I have a young child. Yes. So thank you for helping me remember that's also part of what I want to focus. Okay.
But that's a niche, because that's like a very clear niche. 2 to 6 year old kids, or 0 to 6, whatever, you're 1 to 6, whatever it is. If that's on a website, like outdoor intensive occupational therapy for children ages 2 to 6. That is very clear. When someone lands on your website, if that is the tagline underneath Whole Child Pediatrics, it's Whole Child, right? I'm remembering this right, correct? Okay.
That's right.
I was like, for a minute, I was like, wait, am I saying that wrong? But if that is there, then those people who land on your website, if they have a 10-year-old, they're just going to be like, okay, this practice isn't for me, I'm gone.
Yeah.
But if they have a 2 to 6-year-old, like, that is where they need to be, right? And so they know right away. So I think that's a good niche. Like the pre-K kids, that's a good niche, like broad enough, better than feeding therapy and outdoors and intensive. That's a little too niche, but it's I'm glad you brought up the age range, because that's another way to niche down, right? Like, what age range do I want to work with? And that means you can work with any kid that's 2 to 6 years old in the entire Clayton and Walnut Creek area. That's a ton of kids. So that's a example of a good niche, would be broad enough. What were we talking about? Packaging.
Yeah.
So when you package your services, thinking about, in your dream world, like the way you start with it is like, in your dream world, what would you want to provide to families? And in your dream world, what would you be able to pay yourself to provide those services to families? And then you just figure out how much time it will take you. You add a little bit of extra time or extra money, or maybe pay yourself a little more per hour than you would maybe think, and then come up with the pricing for your services. I know some people do different levels of packages for like different levels of services. I think sometimes that can get a little bit confusing to families. So I would say, if you're starting out, to try to keep it as simple as possible, right? Like, it's 20 visits, which is 10 weeks of services, and the dates start on this date, they end on this date. And within that time, we have 2 parent consult calls, and you get a assessment at the beginning and a report at the end, and it's X number of dollars or whatever it is. So you're grouping all those services together, and then you're charging families a rate that will pay you for all your time involved in that. So, for example, a progress report. If you are going to spend 3 hours writing a progress report for that child at the end of the session, at the end of the session of services, then that progress report should cost $600 or whatever. I'm assuming $200 an hour for a therapist in the Bay Area is like a going rate, essentially. So I'm just like using numbers that are in my head to estimate. But so just really accounting for your time, and that will free you up as you run your practice and grow your practice. That will free you up to not feel like you're working for nothing, like you're not getting paid for tons of hours of time.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I didn't think about adding in the discharge report or progress report as part of that's a great idea. Because then because I just wouldn't feel right to end that and then not give anything formal to say, oh, this is where we are with this. I should certainly factor that in. That was another.
And I wouldn't. Go ahead.
The eval part too, which I think is part of the whole like digital intake thing that I'm working through right now, is a whole nother thing. Right now I spend way too much time on reports, and I want to try to minimize that. Like the standardized tests are super helpful, but maybe I don't need to do like everything. And just I think I've heard you say you use like less of the standardized whole test, right? I mean, I'm like, no, there's no way that everyone spends this much time on their assessments.
You have to think too about, okay, so it's what type of practice do you have, right? My practice does not do intense, big, huge assessments where we do 17 standardized assessments on a kid. That Star Center might do, or some sensory integration clinic that's doing research might do, or something like that. The purpose of our services is not to do this super comprehensive look at the child's entire neurological system, right? Our services are group services for the most part in my practice. And so for that reason, we do a light, like we call it the AOTA codes for assessment or whatever. There's like minimal, low, moderate, and maximum or whatever, complexity. So we bill our assessments as low complexity assessments because the kids that are coming to our services have to be ready for a group model of therapy. Okay, so that's the first thing. We know that there can't be intense needs there because most kids who have really need of a high complexity evaluation, they may not be ready for a group service. So we do assessments that are related to what we treat in our groups. And so I think that's something that we as therapists need to think more about is we shouldn't just be doing assessments because OT says we should do this assessment, or people we knew in peds say that they do all these 5 assessments or whatever. We should be assessing what we want to treat. And so if you're going to do feeding therapy, this is another example of how niching will help you get systems in place in your business. For example, if you were going to do feeding therapy, but you also are going to do kids with sensory processing challenges who are 2 to 6 years old, and those might overlap a little bit. We know this, right? But ultimately, not all of those kids that are in the sensory processing group are also going to have feeding challenges. So you need separate systems for both of those services, right? So you need specific assessments you do for the feeding kids and specific assessments you may do for the sensory kids. So it's a good example of how keeping it simple and focusing on one thing as you get started is very helpful because you get better at creating systems as your business grows. But even now in my practice, I love systems. I love creating them. It's like one of my favorite things to do. But I have hesitated to expand my practice to like other professions, to like speech and PT, to be a multidisciplinary practice because of the systems involved in setting all that up. Like whole new intake process, whole new assessments that we need to get, so it's easiest to just stay OT and stay focused on OT. So I don't think that I'm not a proponent of doing a million standardized assessments, but again, individual therapy is different than group therapy too. So if parents, and that could be part of your tiered packages. If you wanted to do tiered packages, you could do, there's a like a light assessment, or I don't know what you'd call it. We'd have to think up some name to give it, but because I don't think I would tell people it's a min, mod, or maximal complexity evaluation, or
Right.
low, medium, or high. I wouldn't call it that. But you could outline some sort of 2 different packages where maybe one package includes up to 4 standardized assessments, but the other lower priced package only includes 2 standardized assessments, because it won't take as much of your time,
Right.
right? So
And
there's ways to make the packages tiered in that way to like account for some of the more challenging cases that you may bring on that might actually need the higher level assessment.
right.
And you can use like an intake call or a discovery call with a family to help them know what is right for them.
Mm-hmm.
You could say, like, on this call, we are going to talk about which assessment package would be right for your child and if we're a good fit to serve your family's needs or whatever. And then that gives you a frame on the call to say, well, based on what you've shared with me in this call, I really do feel like we need to do the higher complexity evaluation, because I'll need to, I can already think of 4 standardized assessments that I want to do, or whatever. You know, you could use that language to tell the family what you're anticipating will be needed. And another thought I just had too was keeping your assessments separate from make that a separate package than the intervention, because those packages for intervention may not always need an assessment at the beginning. They might come in with an assessment from someone else. They may have been assessed by you previously, and you really don't need to assess more than every year, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
no, it's that, I love that. We right now we have an option at PlaySpace, where I rent space, to offer like just scores only. So it's, you get the standardized scores, but you're not going to get like a full write up on what everything means, and give recommendations and sensory diet recommendations. So maybe the lower tier one is just like, here's the scores. Because I think especially too for this age, like families want and need those, for going into school or trying to get reimbursement or medical base. That is a big need. But okay, maybe I actually just learned recently that there's a therapist that does assessments, like her own assessments. And it's true, right? Like with practice, like you typically can see a child's challenges without doing the standardized test. But I know that there is a therapist that exists that does her own assessment, doesn't give the family anything, and then creates the goals from that, but doesn't physically.
Sure.
And I was like, oh, wow, that's like removes a lot of time, and puts a lot of confidence in yourself and just like creating those goals from the start. I don't think I'm interested in doing that, but it was just like, oh, wow, in time.
I think you have to be careful, because I do think there is a lot of value in going through an assessment process. There is clinical reasoning that needs to be done in order to understand how best to provide therapy to any given child. And that assessment process, like, I don't mean that the standardized test should do the thinking for us, but I do think the assessment process of having some sort of standardized measure we use in order to help us think through, why might that be happening? Why are the results like this?
Totally.
And how can I explain that? And then what are evidence-based ways to address the challenges the child may be having? But along those lines, even if you did do standardized assessments and you are going through an assessment process and you are doing the assessment, you're meeting with the child and you're interacting with them and you're forming an assessment, right? The idea that you just said of not giving the written report, but doing some sort of give the parents the results and talk with them about that and come up with goals from that, I think that could be a way to save time on your end. You could even do something like, with that package level where you don't get an extensive written report, because our reports for OT, at least, I don't know how speech or PT or mental health counselors could be, but our reports for a kid with sensory processing disorder that's 5 years old, that report can be 10 pages long sometimes. It is a lot of content to get through because we're looking at their whole like picture of their life. So it's a lot. So I hear you with wanting to save families some money if they don't want to pay for that report to be written. But what you might do is do the scores, right? Because all of our online assessments now have click and give the printout of the scores or whatever. Give the scores to the family. And then maybe part of the package is a 30-minute Zoom call with you to go through the scores and establish goals. The family can record that if they want to and have that on record. So they have like documentation essentially of your conversation. So you're recording it. So there is documentation. You could even save that in your files and use AI to make a transcript and save that as your documentation of the process with the family, right?
I've been thinking about AI so much. I'm glad you brought it up because I'm being HIPAA compliant. There has to be a way we can take advantage of this technology for these 10-page reports that we write. But maybe we just leave all client information out and then it's like very sounds general and then we just attach the child's name later.
Yeah, I think sometimes we overthink HIPAA too. HIPAA is like protecting people's privacy. So as long as you're making sure that the platform you're using is secure. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take my advice on this, but I think we overthink HIPAA essentially. Like if you were to take that video and publish it on your social media, obviously that's a HIPAA violation, right? Or if you're to take that video and store it in a place that's not secure and someone got access to it, yes, that's a HIPAA violation. But if you have an EMR and you're storing that content in the EMR that is a HIPAA compliant platform, right? Mm-hmm. Most EMRs now have a video conferencing tool that I bet you could record in. Yeah. You throw that into you just get a transcript of it. It's AI service can do that for you. And most video platform services can give you a transcript, right? As long as we're protecting people's health information, I don't think there's anything wrong with using a video conference or anything like that to communicate with families. Like therapists do this all the time. Yeah. I do think it's a way that you could save time though, if you can keep the call to the 30-minute deadline, which I am clearly not good at doing because we're at 47 minutes and 55 seconds right now. So we need to wrap up on the topic of going to call the 30 minutes. So yeah, but I do feel like that's a way you could save some time. And you could map out, if you want the report, it's going to be another $500 because it's my time to write the report, right? But if they don't want the report, it's cheaper because they meet for 30 minutes with you on Zoom and you talk to them and then you have a documentation of that call.
Yeah. No, I love it.
It takes 30 minutes of your time, not or whatever.
I love it. Because I feel like a lot of times too, you put so much into that report, the written report and going through all these ideas, but it's just way too much for the family to digest. And then you're saying all the same things for the remaining time you're with them anyways. You're like, oh yeah, remember this thing. And it's, oh my gosh. Yeah.
It's overwhelming to them. You're right. I hadn't even thought of that, but giving them a 10-page report is overwhelming. But some people want that. Some people want to give it to their psychologist or want to share it with the IEP team or whatever that may be. Yeah. So if they want it though, they need to pay for your time to write it, which is usually pretty extensive. And you will get faster, I think, as you go. But I definitely think some of our ways, I think we need to be thinking outside the box about how to really help families. And some of the ways that we currently provide services, like for example, like giving a 10 or 15 page report, whatever it is, you're right. It's totally overwhelming to them. Okay. On the topic of overwhelm, let's help you not be overwhelmed. I want you to tell me like your top takeaways from today and what you're going to do right after this call.
Ooh, top takeaways are really just like being okay with that niche. Like, yes, this is what I want to do and this is what I'm going to market. And then also the packages, like the specifics of the packages and how to also within that account for the extensive time that I typically spend on like reports and collaboration. Maybe that's something I put in there too, is I'm happy. I love collaborating with other professionals, but we're going to account for that in the package. Yeah, I feel like there's more in my notes here, but those two things pop out right now.
And friends, I regret to inform you that this is where the recording ends. I am so glad that the glitch in the software that I was using to record happened right here, right at the end, because at least Marianna got to tell us her top takeaways, and we could not get the recording to work again after that. And I just had to call it a day. I had to say, okay, we are done. And I'm going to record a little outro at the end to explain to our dear listeners that the recording cut out. So you're not going to get to hear me say to Marianna. Thank you so much for coming on the show and being vulnerable. I always say that when people come on the show to do a live coaching call, because it can be a very vulnerable thing to share with everyone publicly what's going on in your business and the things that you would want advice or input on. And I think the mark of a good business owner is being able to publicly share those things and be transparent about the things that are hard and to be open to feedback and getting that feedback publicly. I guarantee you that if you do that, you are more likely to be successful as a nature-based practice owner. Anyways, if you want to do one of these episodes with me, they are totally free. I offer them for the time being. I should say this because podcasts are weird. They live forever online if I don't take them down, which I very rarely do. But right now I am offering them for free. There's no reimbursement given for them. People don't pay me to do these. I do them for free to offer value to you, the listeners, and to the person who volunteers to come on and be vulnerable, like I just said. If you'd like to do one, wait a second, don't go yet. Do you want 120 ways that you can take your pediatric therapy work outdoors into nature? I wrote the free, big, huge list of nature-based therapy activities just for you. The Big Huge List will give you quick ideas for nature-based sessions. In the Big Huge List, there are activities for gross motor, fine motor, visual perceptual, executive function, balance, group collaboration and team building, social, emotional, and self-regulation skills, as well as speech and language, and a whole section just for swing activities. So go on and get your free Big Huge List so you can get started taking kids outdoors or have some new ideas if you've been doing this a while. You can download your free copy at therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com/list. So until next time, get outside, connect, reflect, and enjoy therapy in the great outdoors.